Good morning. Um, Thank you for coming to this session. I think right now we only have two. Um, I'll just int- briefly introduce myself to you, and towards the end, I will leave 10 minutes for you to introduce yourself and also share your struggles and thoughts on this topic. Okay, my name is Shou Dongfeng, and I'm a faculty member in the Elementary Literacy Special Education program in the College of Education. So my area is literacy education, and I have been on the UCF faculty for close to 20 years. Um, so my topic is balancing academic rigor and flexibility in the pandemic. Okay. I was trying to find a better word for flexibility, but I think this is one of the words researchers and educators use to describe this concept. I've also seen other words such as a compassion, for example. I think they roughly mean the same thing. Okay? So um, um, I, I I have been struggling. Okay, I'm still struggling. Okay, on this topic, and so that was my motivation to do some research on this topic and also present on this topic uh, for this conference. So I think we all struggled, okay, both teachers and students during the pandemic. And we don't know what the situation will be like in the fall. Um, I hope everything will return to normal, but across the country, I think a lot of teachers and students probably will still struggle. Okay, um, so the pandemic has affected education in many ways, right? That's why we struggle. Okay. So here's a little bit background. Okay. It's very fresh experience, so we can all relate to this very well. I'll be very brief. So system-wise, right? In different states, uh, the Department of Education adopted different policies. In Arkansas, it was pretty much normal. Okay, schools were open. Kids still went to school. Um, when an outbreak happened, some schools locked down. Some schools quarantined the faculty, the students. So in our state, I think the situation wasn't very bad. We have graduate students from other states, teachers practicing teachers from other states, such as Illinois, Oregon, um, California, uh, Colorado. Okay, I think in all of those states, schools were completely locked down. Okay, so different states adopted different policies, but system wise, there was huge impact. Okay, and teachers, I think you probably can relate to this very well. Okay, we have to deal with stress and anxiety. We have to cope with the challenges in technology. Okay, I had teachers who had to teach two groups, one in person, the other was online. So it was very difficult to take care of both groups. So the challenges in technology, okay? Sometimes you had to shift your attention to the online group. Sometimes the kids at home had technical issues, lost internet connections, for example. There were a lot of issues, okay, in terms of technology. Um, Also, teaching to meet grade standards. I think a lot of teachers said that their students were like 6 months behind or 1 year behind the grade level expectations. So teachers struggled a lot to meet grade level standards. Yeah, teaching strategies. Because of social distancing, teachers couldn't use small groups. Pair work, they had to separate kids in the classroom, right? They had to use different strategies. A lot of the teaching strategies, activities had to be modified, had to be changed. Okay? And also in terms of grading, right? Assessment. Students, the other population that was hugely impacted was students. Okay, stress. They had to deal with stress, anxiety, right? Coping with challenges in technology, different learning environment, uh, different learning strategies, uh, completing homework, etc. Okay, and I didn't mention other things. For example, a family member or the teacher or the student themselves uh, catching the disease, getting the virus, okay? And they had to yeah, go to the hospital, had to quarantine. Uh, they uh, they may experience, their family members may experience sickness, um, and even worse, death. Loss of jobs, financial difficulties. All the kids were home. Parents had to cook, etc. A lot of issues uh, related to the COVID. Okay? So uh, disrupted the pandemic disrupted teaching and learning at every level. Okay? And also, I wanted to emphasize this. Okay, according to research, okay, the pandemic has widened the disparity between students. Okay, students come from different families, and those who are from more affluent family background usually can deal with the pandemic better. Okay? Uh, for example, their financial situation was not affected, was much better than those who are from low-income families. And that's just an example. Okay, home support provided for the student, access to technology, right, etc. So the pandemic has widened the disparity between students. So yeah, this is just some background. Okay. Here is a very large survey conducted last year by Gross and Opolka. I don't know if I said the names correctly, but the survey um, uh, got responses from 477 districts across the country. And here is a summary of the key findings. Okay, so one in three school districts have been communicating an expectation that teachers will provide instruction while schools remain closed. Okay, one in three. Okay. Urban and suburban districts have been significantly more likely than rural and small town districts to communicate an expectation that teachers will provide instruction. Okay? So urban and suburban schools do much better. Okay, and the third, the most affluent districts were more than twice as likely as a district with the highest concentrations of low-income students to require at least some teachers to provide live, real-time instruction. Okay. And most students, especially those in rural and small districts, will be far behind. So based on the responses that collected, this is their prediction. Okay. So yeah, this was the prediction made last year. So in this fall, they're going to see this. Okay, rural and small districts, their students will be far more behind. Okay, than their peers in uh, urban schools and suburban schools. Okay. So this is a large-scale survey on how schools coped with the pandemic. Teachers, okay, how did teachers cope? Okay, there are a lot of stories, personal stories, um, uh, in terms of the teachers, staff. uh, coping with the pandemic. So the first one was from one of my students last year, and uh, she's a teacher from Arizona. I think she taught a group about 10 students from one of the reservations, and this is what she told me. Okay, not exact wording, but this is what I heard in the conversation. So the teacher would ask students to turn on the camera. Okay, no one did. Okay, and when the teacher asked questions, no one answered. Okay, so the teacher didn't even know whether the students were even at the computer. Okay, during the class. So very frustrating to her. It was distance learning. Um, she felt very, very frustrated. Okay. Now, the second was from a professor uh, at a college in New York City. Okay, so when New York City was hit hard, when it was the epicenter of the pandemic, the colleges had to cope. I believe the public schools had to cope with the changes as well. Okay, so this is what this professor said. Okay, so students responded differently. Okay, they all experience barriers to online learning. Some students got the COVID. Okay, the professor herself, okay, also got the COVID. Okay, but she managed, and she tried to stay true to a personal vow to maintain a fair stance toward grading. Okay, okay. So this is a professor's experience. Okay. I did some research, literature review, okay, to try to identify the themes in research and practice on balancing rigor and flexibility and compassion. Okay, so one of the themes I found was uh, upholding academic standards. Okay, so some researchers, educators say that during the pandemic they were still trying to uphold academic standards. Okay, they were still very strict in grading. Okay, there are some articles I collected, and just from the title, you probably can tell. Okay, the first one is assessment during the COVID-19 pandemic, legal, ethical, and safety considerations. Okay, this is from School Psychology Review. Okay, all these references are listed at the end of the slides, the last couple of slides. Okay, then the second article, the title is Upholding Assessment Quality During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Okay, this is an article from Language Assessment Quarterly, okay, published just this year. Okay, and the next article is Minimize Online Cheating for Online Assessments During COVID-19 Pandemic. Okay, this is from Journal of Chemical Education. Okay. And the last one title is Compassionate Flexibility and Self-Discipline. Okay, this is from Education Sciences, published last year. Okay, so compassionate flexibility and self-discipline, you can see it, right? We need to show compassion to students, but the faculty, the teachers also required self-discipline from the students, resilience, self-discipline from the students. So we're kind of um, um, trying to achieve a balance, right? Compassionate, flexibility, and self-discipline. Okay? So the pandemic is also a test on students' resilience, self-discipline. Okay? So this is the first theme. The second theme is be flexible, okay? Be compassionate. Okay? Now, some of the titles of the articles. Okay, the first one is healing the digital divide during the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, so the researchers were aware of the digital divide in students from more affluent families versus students from low-income families. Okay, um, the access to the internet, availability of computers, digital devices, okay, at home. And so healing the digital divide. Right? This is from Quarterly Review of Distance Education. Yeah, I think low bandwidth is a common issue. Okay, students often have to deal with. Um, this person, Joe Feldman, okay, proposed some very refreshing ideas on assessment during the pandemic. Okay? So in college, we have a grade called incomplete. If students haven't finished, okay, something, okay, in our course, we can give the students an incomplete, so the students can make it up, can turn it in, and we will then grade it, then give uh, a grade based on the students' uh, uh, performance, the quantity of the work. Okay, so this person recommends that public schools should also adopt this. Okay, if students couldn't complete some assignments during the pandemic, during the pandemic, can schools give these students an incomplete? Okay, let the students make up. Okay, then teachers grade and then give them a grade. Okay. Um, there are a lot of very fresh, refreshing ideas in this person's article. Okay, so one was a conversation between Feldman and Reese. The other one is just his ideas. Okay, both articles are listed on one of the slides towards the end. Okay, so. Yeah, the second article, okay, taking the stress out of grading, okay, taking the stress out of grading. Okay. Both articles were published in Educational Leadership. Okay. So this is the second theme. Basically, there are researchers, educators who advocate compassion, okay, flexibility during the pandemic. Okay. Um, um, so this group of researchers, educators, do not talk about the balance, okay? They emphasize compassion, flexibility. Okay? And the last theme, the third theme is questions. Okay, so a lot of people struggle, okay, on this issue, rigor and flexibility, compassion. Okay, so there are two New York Times articles, okay, both published in 2020. The first one is should the virus mean straight A's for every student? Okay. I think in some schools, students get all A's. Okay. So that's why we have this question. Okay. Should the virus mean straight A's for every student? Okay. And the second article was pass fail raises a question. What's the point of grades? Okay. Um, yeah, in some schools, they gave pass or fail, okay, for the classes students take. I think this is also common in colleges. Okay. For example, in U of A last year, uh, all classes offered students the option. Okay, you can either choose between pass or fail, or a letter grade. Okay, if you choose pass or fail, you can still get the credit, but that doesn't go into your GPA. So if you choose a letter grade, okay, then you will take a risk. Okay, you may get a bad grade. So I think that's probably uh, that probably happened in other colleges, other schools as well. Okay, pass or fail. So these are the three themes I found in literature. Okay, there's some other things, re, in research and practice. Okay. So this person, Jankowski, okay, from National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment, did a large-scale survey. Okay, I think she sent surveys to over 800 colleges and universities throughout the country, and collected 813 valid responses. Okay, 813. So that's still a large number. Okay. So some of the things she found in her survey. Okay. 97% of the respondents made changes of some kind during spring 2020 in response to COVID-19. Okay. So 97% of respondents, okay, colleges and universities made changes to grading, okay, assessment. And changes included modifying assignments and assessments, and flexibility in assignment deadlines, shifting to pass-fail, and modifying assessment reporting deadlines. Okay. Another findings, less often made changes. Okay. Uh, so acceptance of alternative assignments. Okay. This is less often accepted. Okay. Modifying the assessment reporting process, modifying course evaluations, okay. Shifting to credit, no credit, changes to assessment roles and responsibilities. Okay. So these are less accepted, okay, changes. And overall, the majority of institutions made between 3 to 4 changes. Okay. Okay, so 75% of respondents felt the changes would not negatively impact the assessment culture of the institution. So even with those changes, they didn't feel that the changes would impact the assessment culture. Okay, and 25% with concerns worried about increased work demands, shifting assessment further away from teaching and learning, and accuracy of assessment. Okay, so yeah, increased work demand. This is understandable. Whenever we extend deadlines, we give them extra time. Faculty and teachers will have to spend extra time. Okay, you have to students redo, resubmit, regrade, right? And changes that should continue. Okay, include these 5 areas. Okay, increased flexibility. Okay, empathy and use of student voice. Okay, alternative measures, addressing inequities, planning for the future. Okay, so this was published in 2020, and they were making recommendations for the future semester for the next school year. Okay, so they still advocate for increased flexibility in assessment, okay, empathy and use of student voice, alternative assessment measures, addressing inequities, okay, in students, planning for the future. Okay. Uh, Also, in terms of staff, teacher, uh, professional development, okay, 42% of respondents stated that all of the professional development needs have been met in the in either in the spring or over the summer. Also, this was last year. Okay, so 42% stated all of the professional development needs have been met. Okay. Remaining professional development needs include this. Okay, alternative assessment examples. Okay, so faculty teachers need uh, alternative assessment examples. Okay, best practices for assessing online. Okay, so when we meet with students in person, there are certain things we can do easily, but when we do it online, uh, it may be difficult. Okay, so best practice for assessing online. Student affairs assessment in remote settings. I think this is about um, one of the offices on campus, student affairs. Okay, they assess student needs, for example. Quality assessment support and examples. Okay. faculty and student and teachers need uh, more support. Okay, more examples of quality assessment. Okay. So a lot of faculty members have to cope with this, and they feel that they need more support in these 5 areas. Okay, more examples, best practices. Okay. Uh, this person also recommends the following do's and don'ts, okay, for the future. Okay. So the first one is do not forget that we are in a pandemic. Okay. So everything is different. Our assessment is also affected. Okay. So be prepared for making changes. Okay. Do not forget we're in a pandemic. Do not cause further harm. Okay. Yeah, what do we mean by that, right? Do not cause further harm. Okay. Can we, yeah, teachers and faculty cause further harm to students? Okay. Yeah. So do not support, enable, or endorse policies that perpetuate further inequities or fuel negative perceptions for students. Okay. So students um, may um, may have been hurt by the pandemic in many ways. Okay, like loss of a loved one. Okay, a lot of struggles at home. Okay, um, dealing with stress, um, anxiety. Okay? In fact, last year, a middle school teacher I had in one of my classes said several middle school students committed suicide that year in her school. Okay, so a lot of students have suffered so much already, okay, from the pandemic. So do not cause further harm, okay, when we assess students. Do not ask students for their approval of a decision that has already been made, okay. So if you or the school has made a decision, do not ask any approve of a decision from your students, okay. Do not require higher level of proof of learning in an online class than you would normally require in a face-to-face setting. Okay, so be reasonable. Okay, be reasonable. Okay, and do not forget that this is not the educational experience students wanted or expected. Okay, so nobody wanted this experience. Okay. Um, there are some other do's and don'ts. Okay. Number 6, do use learning outcome as a guide and means to design and focus educational offerings. Okay. So that's a more important purpose for assessment. Okay. Use learning outcome as a guide and means to design and focus educational offerings. Listen to student voices and respond to their voices accordingly. Okay, modify assignments assessment in ways that are flexible. Okay, utilize low bandwidth and are based upon the principles of equitable assessment. Okay? And also be aware of and address systematic inequities. Okay, so when you assign an assignment and when you assess students, always keep this in mind. Okay, some students may not have access to uh, a digital device, internet, okay, enough bandwidth to complete the assignment. Okay. Also, also engage in trauma-informed and healing-centered pedagogy and assessment. Okay. Yeah. Again, some students may have been traumatized in different ways. Okay. So whenever we talk to students, we will never teach. Okay. Keep that in mind. Okay. The possible, okay, trauma the students may have experienced. And in the report, this author also cited Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so we are all familiar with the needs hierarchy, right? So I think this is a great thing to remember when we teach, when we assess our students. Okay, so the first three needs. Okay, the first one is physiological needs, and such as food, water, sleep, and clothing. Okay, yeah. So our students, right, faculty too, right, teachers. Okay, food, water, sleep, and clothing. Okay, safety needs. Okay, personal security, employment, etc. Right. Yeah, safety from the virus, right? Uh, parents, employment, right? Safety needs, okay? Love needs, okay? Such as friendship, sense of connection, and family, right? Due to social distancing, isolation, quarantine, okay? Yeah, we all experienced difficulty in the love needs as well, right? So learning, the schooling comes really far, far below this, okay? So this, I think, this hierarchy um, is uh, very important in helping us understand the true needs of our students. Okay, yeah, they have to, yeah, have food, right? They have to have clothing, right? Financial needs, right? Then safety needs, right? And the love needs. Okay. And I think we have all seen this, faculty, teachers leaving education. Okay, they chose early retirement. Okay. In the survey, one respondent said this. Okay, it is a delicate dance of flexibility, compassion, normalcy, and compliance. Okay, so as an institution, okay, a school, okay, we have to comply uh, with just all these kind of standards, right, requirements from, say, the state Department of Education, from other accreditation agencies. Okay, we'll have to meet the standards. Okay. On the other hand, we have to be flexible. We have to compassionate to student needs. Okay, so it is a very delicate dance. Okay. And Jill Feldman also said this. Okay, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that students don't need more stress. Okay, it's that students don't need more stress. Okay, and in one of the articles, okay, if you're interested in his ideas, uh, he proposed a lot of uh, new ideas on alternative assessment grading. Okay. Um, So also wanted to take a look at the support states provided to schools and teachers. Okay, so I found two states. Okay, one is Minnesota, the other is California. Okay, and they have some guidance for assessment during the pandemic. So this is what the Minnesota State Department of Education recommended, okay, to schools. Okay, so they have a few areas. The first is classroom assessment. The second is standardized assessment, and the third is data-based decision making. Okay, so let's take a look at what Minnesota did during the pandemic. And so, in terms of classroom assessments, in terms of classroom assessment, so the first is prioritize assessments that align most closely to classroom instruction. Okay, so I think the idea is to reduce assessments, okay, only choose those that are closely aligned to classroom instruction. Okay, the assessments can inform instruction, can help us, determine student needs. help teachers prepare lessons, okay, prioritize assessments, okay. And the second is increase regular use of informal assessment, okay. So um, uh, informal classroom-based assessments can tell us more about the students' strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so they have specific examples. Use pre-tests, right? Post-tests, post-daily reviews, classroom assessment. Okay, teacher-made assessment. Okay. The third point is be efficient with teacher practitioner time. Okay, and maximize use of existing data. Okay, so usually the schools already have collected a lot of student data. Okay, so we can use those data to guide our instruction. Okay, so try to avoid administering duplicative or redundant assessments. Okay, a lot of teachers complain, we assess too much assessments, uh, take away too much instructional time. Okay, so during the pandemic, uh, schools it were encouraged to avoid over assessing students. Okay, avoid administering duplicative or redundant assessments. And the fourth point is provide professional development to teachers. Okay, in terms of standardized assessments, okay, yeah, this is a compliant piece. Okay, we have to administer those standardized tests. Okay, um, I think Arkansas just released the ACT Aspire test results a few days ago, last week. Okay, all schools were nervous, and they, yeah, they they didn't know how students did last year. Okay, um, so standardized assessment. This is a compliant piece. So prioritize administering universal screening assessments. Okay, okay. So only administer those universal okay, screening assessment. Okay. Continue administering assessment that were in place before the COVID-19. Okay, avoid you introducing new assessments. Okay? Do not introduce new assessment. Okay, offer a flexible testing window to increase higher engagement and completion rates. Okay? When administering standardized assessment remotely, okay, consider the following guidelines. Yeah, assessment okay, must be conducted and interpreted based on the guidance provided by the test vendor. Okay? So this is a Rigor piece, right? Uh, yeah, there is a pandemic. Okay, we can make all kinds of changes uh, to help our students, but still, okay, there's a compliance piece. Okay, we have to follow the procedures. Okay, in conducting and administering these standardized tests provided by the vendor. Okay, establish procedures that ensure teachers, families, and students have the appropriate materials and understand how to complete the assessment accurately. Okay, so this is the compassion, okay, flexibility piece. Okay. The third area uh, that is related to assessment, okay, is database decision making. So how do we use data, right, during the pandemic? Okay, do not aggregate student outcome data collected during the pandemic with data from previous school years. Okay, I think this is very important. Okay, um, um, I think we have to acknowledge that the pandemic has affected student learning, affected teacher teaching. Uh, the data may not reflect, okay, uh, what the teacher is able to do, what the students is able to do. Okay, so that's why we have this: do not aggregate student outcome data collected during the pandemic with data from previous school years. So look at this data separately, okay? Continue using multiple sources of data, okay? We always do this, okay? But there's an important piece of advice, okay? If different sources of data are missing at the local level, okay? Yeah, due to school closure, for example, okay? School lockdown, okay? Quarantine of students and teachers, for example. If different sources of data are missing, okay? Districts, schools, program should dive deeper, okay, to examine reasons for the missing data and create a plan for targeted data collection. Okay. And so if for some reason, okay, some assessments were not administered, okay, this is what schools district should do. Okay. There are some other recommendations related to database decision making. Okay. Ensure grade level and cross-grade level collaboration. Okay. Establish routines where collaborative teams conduct regular and timely data review to make instructional decisions. Okay. So yeah, we have this pandemic, but teacher collaboration, uh, data teams, okay, time to look at data are still encouraged. Okay. Uh, uh, the fourth point that is related to data-based decision making. Okay, do not use state accountability tests. Okay, to determine instructional placements and programs for individual students. Okay, do not use state accountability tests. Okay, yeah, to determine instructional placements. Okay. I think the idea is to use more classroom assessment, more informal assessment. Create a communication and professional learning plan to ensure that educators, practitioner students, and families understand the purpose of the assessment. Okay. Use universal screening data to facilitate identifying students for additional support. Okay. Use universal, okay, screening data. Do not assess student individually. Okay. For this purpose, okay, remediation and accelerated supports. So these are the guidelines from Minnesota. Okay, 3 areas. Okay, classroom assessment, standardized assessments, then how to use the data. Okay, in decision making. So 3 areas in their recommendations. The second state I looked at. Sorry, this. Okay, states was California. Okay. So California Department of Education leaves grading policies and practices to the local. Okay, so local school district schools make their own decisions. Okay. However, okay, this policy institute is called California Collaborative on District Reform. Okay, recommended uh, equity-based decisions. Okay, equity-based decisions. Some of the recommendations may appear to be very progressive, very radical. Okay, let's take a look at these 3 recommendations. Okay. So the first one is equity actions for state policymakers, okay, state level, okay, like Department of Education. Okay. Direct CDE, that's California Department of Education, to require guidance for all LEAs, local education agencies, to implement a uniform pass, no pass grading policy for all COVID-19 impacted terms. Okay, this is a statewide, okay, recommendation. Okay, implement a uniform pass, no pass grading policy for all COVID-19 impacted terms. Okay. The second is for K through 12 education leaders, okay, district school level leaders, okay, for grade point average, okay, calculation purposes, weigh a passing grade as equivalent to an A grade, okay, reflect the student's academic transcript, reflect this calculation. I talked about U of A's policy last year. They gave students the option, right, pass or fail. But if students chose that option, then their grade pass, okay, will not go into their GPA. Okay, so in California, they recommend this. Okay, passing is equivalent to A. Okay, and should be entered in GPA calculation. Okay? And the third is for college and university leaders, right? Because they're going to admit new students. Okay, weigh a high school passing grade equivalent to an A for COVID-19 impacted terms. Okay, so this is for college and university leaders. Right? Very progressive thinking, right? So state level, okay, then district school level, then university, okay, equity based, okay, grading. This is what a policy institute in the state of Washington made during the pandemic. It's called Center for Reinventing Public Education. Okay. Um, so the recommendations are based on the need to understand student learning. Okay, the student learning is greater than ever. Okay, because of the pandemic, okay, because of school closures, lockdowns, quarantine, etc. Okay, we don't understand our students that well. Okay, our understanding of our students' strengths and weakness is very limited. Okay, so they emphasize the need to understand student learning. Okay, these are the recommendations. First, ask why or why not to assess. Okay, do not harm. Okay, when making the decision on retention, grade retention intervention. Okay, do not harm. Okay, do not harm. Take the first 2 or 3 weeks to focus on student physical and emotional. I think this is very important. Okay, so at the beginning of the school year, do not, usually we ask teachers to assess, right, their needs, the student weaknesses, strengths in different areas, right? But here's the recommendation. Okay, focus on students' physical and emotional well-being at the beginning of the school year. Okay, and try to strengthen relationships with students. Okay? I feel this is a very important recommendation. Okay. The next one I want to emphasize is number 7. Okay, do not use assessment for accountability unless they were designed and validated for that purpose. Okay, so do not misuse assessment. Okay, so this is what this Education Policy Institute recommended in the state of Washington. Okay. Okay, so we looked at several states, right? California, okay, equity-based decisions. Minnesota, I feel Minnesota had more specific guidance regarding assessments, and this is what the state of Washington, okay, was trying to do. Okay. Okay, here are my own thoughts. Okay. Um, I think we can all relate to this as educators. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I struggle a lot, okay, in this area as well. I'm sure my colleagues probably also struggle. Okay, I feel we need to have more conversation on this topic. Okay, teachers and faculty need some guidance from the administration on how to administer different types of assessments. Okay, yeah, I think a lot of schools probably didn't provide any specific guidance. Okay, that's one reason why we struggled. Okay. Teachers and faculty need some guidance from administration on how to use assessment results. Okay, like intervention decisions. Okay, when we use classroom assessment, we see needs, right? Can we use the assessment results to make decisions um, on whether to provide interventions to provide additional help? And teachers, faculty should consider the greater needs of students: safety, stress, anxiety, food, access to and support in technology. Right? Yeah, safety, okay, anxiety, stress, etc. Okay, flexibility, okay, deadlines, yeah, quantity, alternative assessments. Okay, yeah. For example, in our classes, we have a field assignment, which means that students need to complete things in the school. Okay, um, yeah, school closures happen all the time. Sometimes a hallway, the whole hallway was closed due to an outbreak. Okay, sometimes a whole grade, okay, was uh, in quarantine. So that affected our students' field assignments. Okay, so how do we do that? Do not over assess. Okay, so try to reduce assessment, assign a key assessment and more important assessments. We have to collect model assessment, key assessments for accreditation body. Okay, and when the school is closed, there's no way the student can do the assessment. So how do we do that? Right? Sometimes I took the problem to the dean's office, okay, to the chair, and then they had to meet and talk about college-wide decisions. Okay, always gave students the benefit of doubt. That's what I did. Okay, I always gave my students the benefit of doubt. If they tell me that their school is in quarantine, their school is closed, or he or she had interconnection issues. They had no power. Last year when we had the big snow, heavy snow, no power. Or if they say their laptop was broken, or if they say um, they didn't have enough bandwidth, I trust my students. Okay, I trust my students. So always give students the benefit of doubt. Okay, yeah. Again, do no harm. Okay. Uh, I try not to harm my students' educational opportunities. Okay. I try not to fail them. Okay. So they have to leave the program. They have to leave the school. Okay. Um, just to, yeah, to show my compassion, my flexibility. Okay. Also, there's an inequity issue. Okay. In our students, some students had the means to take online classes. Uh, they don't have to babysit. They don't have to work. Other students struggle a lot taking care of their siblings. Uh, no separate room. In fact, my son told me that some of his classmates had to use their bathroom at home to take online classes because that's the only quiet place in their home to take online classes. Okay? And I had another student who had to drive to her aunt's home to sit on the drive because there was a social distancing issue. He couldn't go into his aunt's home, so he had to park uh, on that driveway and take classes there. Okay? So there's an equity issue too. Okay. Uh, on the other hand, we also had to uphold the rigor, okay, because of the compliance issue. We have to comply with the standards, okay, in accreditation in our program. Okay. So we still had to assess regularly to understand student learning, okay, inform instruction. Okay. I always ask my students to give their best. Okay. I think there's no way, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. I return the homework, the assignments to some of my students. Okay. because there were missing parts in the paper. Okay, the paper was not complete. Okay, um, on other issues like writing, mechanical issues, misspelling, I try to ignore those. But uh, um, when your paper, okay, doesn't have coherent parts, okay, there were missing parts, I return those papers back to them and ask them to revise, rewrite, and resubmit. Okay, and I still try to reward those hard workers and high quality work with good grades. Okay, I still try to make sure that those students get good grades. Okay, so these are some of my thoughts, okay, on how to balance between academic rigor and compassion, flexibility. Okay. Uh, Before I ask you to share your struggles and thoughts, okay, so I'm going to show you the references. If you are interested in reading more about this topic, okay, so these are some of the references on the topic, okay. Okay, so could you uh, tell me something about yourself and then also your struggles, your thoughts on this issue, please? Okay, is it asked to unmute? Okay, yeah, Shelly, would you, are you willing to share your thoughts on this?
Oh, I can unmute. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Um, I teach eighth grade special ed math for both
Mhm,
resource and co-taught in Valonia. And I guess my biggest issue is just a lot of the kids in my population need a lot of help when they're doing virtual work. And I'm finding that their parents are, have their own things going on, like work or something else, and they can't really help them. And so my kids, whenever they're on quarantined or whatever, they're just not getting, the education that they need. And so even when we had those 2 weeks of snow, when it wasn't even anything to do with COVID, like my kids came back and we had to do their work for all their other classes because they did absolutely nothing. And
mhm,
so like that's kind of been my biggest, I guess, challenge is just trying to make sure that they're getting educated while they're not in the classroom.
mhm.
So,
But whenever you can, whenever they are with you, you probably did your best to
oh,
help
for
them,
sure.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, when they're home, when their parents are not around, it's very especially hard for special education students, I guess, right?
hmm
Yeah. How about grading? Did you have struggle in grading, in assigning a grade?
I think what I did that really worked for me this year was I was a lot more selective on what assignments I would take grades for.
Okay.
Um, Simply because, if it's really not assessing their knowledge, does it really need to be graded? You know?
Mm-hmm.
I did do a lot more participation credit, I think, this year,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to kind of maybe try to motivate them to just be present and to try to engage while at home.
Mm-hmm.
But I just felt like my grading was, I didn't have as much to grade because I didn't grade everything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I was just a
Mm-hmm.
lot more selective. So I think that
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
helped out
Mm-hmm.
for me this past year.
Yeah, I think that that's a great practice. That's recommended by many researchers, educators, reducing assessments, trying to prioritize assessments. So that's a very good practice.
hmm
Yeah. Did you have school-wide guidance on assessments?
We use CFAs, so we would get together in a department and we would all kind of create our formal assessments and
Hmm.
make sure that they were all the same.
Okay.
So we had a PLC at my school district, and so that kind of seemed to help to make sure that our kids are all learning the essential standards and the essential skills that they really need.
Hmm.
And then by doing a common formative assessment, then we kind of are able to go, okay, yeah, they all got this one concept or not. And it
Hmm.
wasn't based on, okay, well, that teacher just didn't even ask that question. So then that way it was kind of more of a uniformed knowledge
Hmm.
across the grade
Hmm.
level for that subject.
That's great. Teacher collaboration was still there. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. That's another theme, another recommendation made by many researchers and
Hmm.
educators. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Teacher collaboration. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts you'd like to share with us, Sherry?
Um, my name is Fran Mosley, and
Okay.
I'm a teacher in the Little Rock School District
Mm-hmm.
and a middle school teacher, grades 6 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a core teacher. I do a academic support
Mm-hmm.
program for kids that would be first generation college students. And anyway, last year I was kind of more the SEL person for my so I tried my best I had to teach virtual and face-to-face students at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I to be sure virtual and the face-to-face kids, like my face-to-face kids, the kids in the room with me, they would join the Zoom too, because
Mm-hmm.
that's a major platform that they would join the Zoom to everybody, the face-to-face and the virtual students 30 minutes in each block of period of time I had them. And they seemed to really enjoy that because they could interact. The kids that were at home could interact with the kids that were in the class in the school. And a lot of them had been to school together previously, but last year they were separated because of COVID. And
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to work. But, you know, it was a struggle all year, everything else you've heard about it. But I just figured out, I tried to, as far as from I did, collect the points from, because
Mm-hmm.
some things just weren't realistic for my virtual kids to and, you know, all kinds of different kind of activities to try to keep them and wanting to come back, and especially the class, to sign on because they had a choice. They didn't have
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of accountability there. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, middle school had to teach two groups, right? Face to face and distance. Okay, the virtual online group. Yeah, a lot of teachers had to deal with that issue. But I'm glad uh, you seem to do very well, very successful, and the virtual students also enjoyed their experiences. That's really great. Okay. Yeah. You mentioned the social emotional learning piece. Okay. Yeah, I think that was so important last year. Okay. As I said earlier, another a middle school teacher, I think she's from Arkansas, somewhere in Arkansas, said in her school district, several students committed suicide last year. So I think a lot of teachers, staff, students experienced a high level of stress, anxiety. So yeah, again, based on Maslow's need hierarchy, um, a, a lot of other things come before schooling, education for our kids. Okay. Are there any things you would like to discuss in my presentation? Uh, just the the things, the topics within the presentation. Okay. If not, I wanted to thank you both for attending my session. If you need the slides, I can surely email the slides to you. Just let me know.